Hi guys, today I'm going to be talking to Tiffany Cabán. She's a candidate for the 22nd Council District, which covers Astoria and parts of Jackson Heights, East Helmhurst and Woodside.
So, Tiffany, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, great, great. So, could you just tell us a little bit, about why you're looking to run for city council? Obviously, got a great profile in terms of running for DA. Why are you looking for city council?
I mean, just to start, I had been asked to run for city council and like almost every other office under the sun after my race for DA. Yeah. And I was like, no, no way, absolutely not. I felt like I needed to find my place in doing the work and going where the work was. And, I took a job with the Working Families Party doing political organizing to help get DAs, progressive DAs elected around the country while still doing a lot of criminal justice advocacy here in the city at the state level. But something changed. In my mind, you go where the work is and you go where you can be of most help to your neighbors. And I love my neighbors here in District 22 and around the city. At the intersection of a global pandemic, a health crisis, right? And an international uprising against the murders of Black folks, the hands of the police. We saw in our city council that the legislative body failed the test of moral clarity and political courage, right? Refusing to defund the bloated NYPD budget while our schools and hospitals were gutted, while we literally had healthcare workers out in the streets begging for PPE. And so in my mind, this is absolutely where the work is. And I bring all of my same experiences that I had as a public defender, as a political organizer, as an activist, my lived experiences as a queer Latina who has spent a lot of time, born and raised here in Queens, spent a lot of time in this district, to say that it's time to do the work here. We have an immense opportunity with there are going to be at least 35 new members of the city council. And so there's a lot of work to be done, not just in this district, but in coalition with other folks, like-minded folks who are ready to push our progressive values and do things like reallocate resources into a robust public health infrastructure, establish a care economy, bring a Green New Deal into our city, and move us forward through the pandemic. It's going to be hard for a while.
Very much so. So tell me, you talked about criminal justice, the NYPD there. You've talked about, defunding and disbanding the NYPD. How would you go about that?
I want to start with talking about what our collective goal is. And this is why I do believe it's a continuation of the work in terms of my career up to this point, is that what we are looking to do, right? And I think that no matter where you land on the spectrum, what we are looking to do, I think we can agree that we all want the best public health and public safety outcomes, period. And our system as it exists just does not do that. I talk to folks about my experience as a public defender, about my work in the criminal justice space, and talking about the things that actually keep our community safe. A lot of people don't know that right here in New York City, only about between 2 to 5% of what the police do is what you think they do, which is responding to sort of violent harm or violent crimes. And they're not interrupting it, they're not preventing it, they're responding to it. And that other 97% of what they do is, before our schools closed, there were police officers in our schools taking kids' temperatures because we didn't have enough nurses. Why don't we have more nurses instead of police officers? We have, the police department has control over credentialing our press corps. Why is that the case? We have police officers be the people who respond at your door when you're being evicted from your home. They are the people who are responding to folks who are in mental health crisis instead of mental health experts. They're in our schools doing the work of counselors when we could have actual counselors. It's really about setting up a governmental infrastructure and system that provides us with the skilled workers we need to address the problems that we have at their roots. That's all we're talking about.
So you're talking about splitting it up, so to speak. You could have the traffic agents, you could have the school safety agents, the mental health people. They could all be sort of split up into their own kind of unit that's outside of the NYPD. And then you could sort of play around with the budget and look at military weapons and all that stuff. And
Well,
And
we need to demilitarize.
that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I
demilitarize
mean. Yeah.
NYPD. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about, we had protesters in the streets, people who were deeply, deeply affected by police violence, protest in the streets in defense of Black lives, and be met with more police violence and weapons of war, right? So yeah, we have to really move away from this. Like, let's talk about what does work. By, for example, half of the people that are killed by police across the country, half of them are people living with mental health issues, right? In places where they have removed police from responding to mental health crises, those deaths have gone down and there have been better health outcomes. In terms of reducing crime, better than the police could ever do, there's empirical evidence to show that in any community where you fund or add 10 community-based organizations, crime goes down in every category, from violent, whether it's murder, sexual assault, robbery, down to nonviolent offenses like theft, all of those kinds of things, goes down across the board. When you invest in violence interruption groups like Cure Violence or Life Camp, great groups that we have right here in the city, gun violence goes down by upwards of 30 to 40% in ways that the police aren't able to do. When we decriminalize drug use and make it okay for people to have access to safe consumption sites and other harm reduction services, overdose deaths go down by upwards of 40%, and there are less property-related crimes as a result. We're talking about things that save lives and keep our communities safer, better than any of the results that police have done. And so at what point are we going to say we want to do the stuff that works?
Right. I mean, look, a lot of people sort of, look at this thing in terms of very simple terms. They look at how many cops are on the streets and they look at how much money is getting allocated. They think 35,000 cops, $6 billion budget. And it's sort of hard to think beyond that for a lot of people. Are you able to sort of, I guess you can't really come up with budgets until you sort of work out what you split off and what you do, right? So you can't really give those hard and fast numbers that often people ask for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our current comptroller had published a plan for cutting off, and I'm not saying that this is where I stand. I think we can do a lot better in a much faster period of time. But like being able to point out just over the span of a couple of years, $1 billion in cuts going from equipment, right? Going from making sure that we aren't adding more officers to the force, so like natural attrition rates. There are all of these, taking police officers out of different response systems, all of these different places that we can do that. Again, in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of an economic crisis where we're seeing so many workers, essential workers, be fired or furloughed, so many public sector workers, not getting their pay. And we just added several more classes of police officers. So, this is not a question of, whether we can do it, do we have enough money to do it, or to create these alternative systems, but are around the political will and the political pressure to do it.
Okay. All right. Now, Rikers Island, you've been very outspoken on it. You've, wanted it closed. You don't want any more jails. Obviously, it's in the district. What are your sort of long-term plans for Rikers Island? And do you think there's going to be resistance to closing it with budget constraints?
Again, I go back to that idea that, austerity budgets are not the answer at the city or state level. We need to be taxing the rich, and we need to be reallocating our resources so that we have a city budget that is truly a moral document that reflects the values of the people, the working people who live here, right? And that is the objective. When it comes to Rikers Island, what we are trying to disrupt and dismantle is a brutal system of mass incarceration. We are talking about the vestiges of racialized capitalism. And by closing Rikers Island, we can invest resources in our communities in ways that actually make us safe. But aside from that, we can really make a difference on the environmental justice front, which necessarily is a racial justice issue. I listened to a panel not that long ago where an environmental justice activist had said, if we have a decade to solve the climate crisis, we've got 4 years to solve racism. And Rikers Island and the proposal for a renewable Rikers is like a really good example of that intersection. Because by closing Rikers Island, this place that has, contributed to the mass incarceration of Black and brown and immigrant and poor and queer folks, and replacing it with a renewable energy source, which amongst other things could store enough battery energy to replace every single dirty peaker plant in our city, would be something really incredible. It wouldn't be enough to solve our climate issues, but it's no mistake that the same neighborhoods that have been over-policed and are over-represented, over-incarcerated over on Rikers Island are the same communities with those dirty peaker plants. They're the same community members that are consistently and constantly disinvested in.
Okay. Well, moving on a little bit, affordable housing and homelessness. The mayor's plan for affordable housing, how do you view it? How did you rate it? Also, the income levels with mandatory inclusionary housing. What do you think of those? If you could just sort of give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, to put it really simply, the MIH program is neither mandatory nor inclusionary. Like it offers private developers plenty of ways to extract wealth from our communities and sort of escape kind of like the spirit and the purpose of the law while capitalizing on different loopholes and subsidies. And the mayor suggested that tens of thousands of units would be created by now, but the actual number is actually like quite a bit lower. Yet we still see all of these luxury developments still going up, and many times like going up and then sometimes like sitting empty, right? In its current form, I think MIH targets neighborhoods that can't afford to build the new developments. You're looking at determining affordability with rates that really don't apply, right? Like the geographic area that looking at, including the income of suburbs and things. It doesn't actually equal affordability in the neighborhood that we're talking about.
Yeah,
but
I hear that a lot. 80% AMI, 70% AMI, way too high for the neighboring, district. Like last night, Sunnyside, Phipps houses. I mean, people were complaining about 90% AMI. That's way higher than the average in the zip code. So what would you do, or how can you go about sort of changing that to make it better fit for people?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is that it's not even just about, like affordable housing or, middle class housing or working class housing. We have to deeply, deeply invest in, I'm going to use the word a lot, deeply affordable housing, ultra affordable housing, right? And so really the pillars that we should be looking at when it comes to solving our housing and our homelessness crisis is making sure that we are doing everything we can to stop gentrification and displacement, that we are preserving and developing deeply affordable social housing, right? And that we are increasing like renter and tenant control in the process. And then when it comes to homelessness, and it's a problem here, it's around the city, but here in our district, right? We're going to see the evictions starting up again. The projections are showing that they may double in my neighborhood here, which would put us at something like the possibility of over the next year, 350 households being evicted, right? We have, the shelter here in district, over 800 residents that are experiencing homelessness. And so we have to take a holistic approach. Yes, we need deeply, deeply affordable housing, but we need to do other things. We need universal healthcare, right? We need a single healthcare system that allows folks to have access, because we are all, so many of us, one medical bill away from being homeless. We need better worker protections, right? To make sure that workers are protected, they aren't fired without cause. All of those kinds of things are going to contribute to creating the kind of environment necessary to keep people housed.
Yeah. Speaking, we're talking about rezonings, affordable housing and things like that. What do you think of member deference in terms of zoning? I mean, you've got this big thing in Flushing that's proposed, and you've got a lot of council members that are saying, hey, listen, I don't really want to go along with that. But tradition would say, hey, listen, it's not up to that council member, it's up to, say, Peter Koo in Flushing. So what do you think of the concept of member deference? Would you would you like to see that continue, or would you say, hey, wait a minute, no?
I don't support continuing member deference for a couple of reasons, right? And I have been a vocal supporter of the folks who are calling on, Peter Koo and other council members to reject the Flushing rezoning plan. I don't support it. One, our deference should be to the working people of our city, right? And understanding that what is good for the most vulnerable of us is good for all of us collectively. And we see that throughout history, like over and over again. And that really drives my reasoning behind that. And also, our city is so interconnected. What you do in one neighborhood necessarily affects every other one. And to think that it just doesn't make much sense. So for me, I want to make sure that we are always standing with working class families in our city, with the folks who are put on the margins, whether they are, Black, brown, immigrant, queer, gig workers, folks that typically haven't had the same kinds of protections and opportunities that other more privileged folks have. Like, those are the people that we need to be looking out for when we talk about these rezonings. We have to make sure that we aren't allowing, private developers continue to extract wealth from our communities while not providing anything for the community members who have been there. Right.
Okay. Astoria and transportation. There's parts of Astoria where it's a bit of a desert, where there's no subway, and then the ferry sort of is way away, especially around the Astoria houses up to, 31st Street. What can be done in terms of, better, helping people with transportation?
Yeah, obviously it's no surprise that where you see a bit of a transportation desert is west of 21st Street. It's the area where the only public housing complex in our district is. It is an area that has been deeply disinvested from. Some of the things that we can do, and we now have the ferry right next to the houses. But before that, you're talking about, you can literally see Manhattan from the houses, right? It's just maybe 1,000 feet away. Don't count me on that, but it's so close. Yeah. It's so close. Yet the commute there is like, you got to take a bus to a train, and it's going to take you an hour to do it, which is really terrible. So some of the things that I think that we need to be doing to expand our transportation options in Astoria, I think we absolutely need an actual bus lane out on 21st Street. Going over there, that would do a ton for the traffic and accessibility for folks. We need more connectivity with our bike lanes. We have gotten some new ones. We recently got a new bike lane on Crescent Street in Astoria. But although I will say this, we need to expand the connectivity of our bike lane infrastructure, but also do it in a way that's safe. Unfortunately, it was really, really awful. We had a community member die recently. And advocates and community members and local electeds have been calling for the simplest of safeguards, quick curbs, things like that, to make that lane safer, so that we are protecting cyclists and
that was the Budweiser truck, right? Yeah.
Really, really awful. So connectivity with more bike lanes, obviously the bus lane on 21st Street. Those are just some of the things that we could be doing to increase the transportation options.
Okay. Tiffany, community boards, how would you go about making appointments, and do you sort of think that the current system of appointments works?
Yeah, I think that what's really important about our community boards is that we are doing the work to create more on-ramps for civic engagement, right? Because otherwise, we end up with these more like sort of homogeneous bodies that don't really reflect the diversity and all kinds of things. And, whether it is race, socioeconomic status, all of the different cross sections of our communities, we have to do the work to reach out to our neighbors to make this more accessible. And some of that is like getting people out of being disillusioned with some of the process. So I think it'd be really important to look at the demographics and the politics of and the values of our district, and making sure that we have a really good and intentional cross section of our community represented from every corner of our district.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the concept of like the council member, picking half and the borough president picking half and sort of back and forth between, the council and the borough president, do you think that concept works?
I think that on both ends, whether you say, well, the council members should just do it and pull the borough president out of it, or you don't. In either scenario, what I think that we need to do, and actually I think it's an interesting thing that Gail Brewer has done, is adding to this idea that, well, one, we want to be really intentional and create these on-ramps for a more diverse body, but like changing a little bit of that application process, seeing how folks communicate and interact with one another. I had heard from some folks that part of her interview system was group activities, so that people could see what it would be like to work with other people and kind of evaluate what the dynamics would be like. Just being really creative about saying, like, what kinds of folks do we want sitting on these boards, and do they reflect our values, and are they going to be committed to doing the work?
Okay. Last thing on community boards, attendances at these community boards. Traditionally, you've had people that have, barely showed up, and they keep getting reappointed again and again and again. How would you sort of look at that? Would you be pretty tough on people that didn't show up? How would you monitor that?
Yeah, absolutely. We want people that are going to be engaged, right? You wouldn't let other folks in your job or other entities continue to not show up and then say, hey, we're just going to hold this spot for you. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of good work to be done. Yeah. And again, when you were talking about opportunities to create on-ramps to civic engagement, which then grows the impact of sort of like the political education that you're trying to do, making sure that you're getting your neighbors and community members involved, because each of those, like, if your community member is not showing up to the meetings, then presumably they're not doing the other things you hope your community board member is going to do outside with their neighbors on a regular basis. So we want people, and we want to create opportunities for people to be like really excited to do that work.
Yeah, okay, terrific. Last topic is schools. You've talked heavily about desegregating schools, and I just wanted to ask, how would you go about that? What would it mean for specialized school applications or gifted and talented classes? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, right, I would be working directly with Black and Brown students impacted by our segregated school system, period. And that includes groups like Teens Take Charge and Integrate NYC. And I definitely support the Teens Take Charge's plan to eliminate admission screens, the gifted and talented programs. And I think that we could start that work right here in school district in D30, right, by launching a comprehensive diversity plan in deep partnership with parents, educators, students, advocates to desegregate our schools. And so one of the things that we could do is try to build on the success of the District 15 middle school integration plan and recreate and improve it across, not just in our district, but across the city for sure.
Okay. All right. Now, Tiffany, just to finish up, are there any particular issues that you're going to focus on heavily? Obviously you're talking about, healthcare and justice and what have you, but I look at, say, Costa Constantinides, he's focused heavily on the environment. Is there any sort of area that you're going to sort of make your own, so to speak?
Yeah, again, when I think about the work, so much of it is saying, like, how do we make sure we have the best public safety and public health outcomes possible? And we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so, like, really, we have to go exactly where people need us to in this moment. Right now, some of the biggest needs are, access to food, maintaining their housing, and the ability to, like, have open spaces to be able to take advantage of and safely social distance and still be able to connect with other human beings. And, you know, so part of the work going in is really going to be prioritized picking up the baton on the great environmental work that Costa is doing. You know, I'm really excited that the funds were released to clean up and fix up that dock right next to the Astoria houses. And, you know, they're going to put a station there for children in the neighborhood to be able to have like science lessons there and things like that. And that's going to be really great. But it's only part of the original Imagine project. And so like building on things like that, renewable Rikers, like there is a timeline involved. That set of there's a lot of work to be done there, and it's a window, and we can't lose it. So that absolutely has to be a priority: closing Rikers and getting renewable Rikers done. And then some of the other things are, you know, just really, really hyper local. Folks here, we love our open streets. We want to make them permanent and expand them. We want to create more opportunities for our business owners, our restaurant owners, our gig workers, right? Like while creating safe places for kids and other folks to be able to walk around safely and be outside and enjoy different things. Those are some of the things to focus on for sure.
Okay. Well, Tiffany, thank you very much. I appreciate, you know, your time.
Thank you.